Hello everyone. Welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with case 1. Deanna Lee Criswell was born in 1971 and spent her early years in the city of Spokane, Washington, growing up in a family marked by both love and challenges. She had an older sister, Debbie, who was 14 years her senior, creating a significant age gap that shaped parts of her childhood. When Deanna was just 3 years old, her parents' marriage ended in divorce. Her father, Jerry Criswell, worked as a trucker, often away on the road, while her mother took on the enormous responsibility of raising Deanna and supporting the household by working 2 jobs. As a young girl, Deanna formed a close bond with her maternal grandfather, spending much of her time with him whenever her mother was occupied with work. His presence provided stability and companionship during her formative years. However, his death marked a turning point in her life. Left without that guiding figure, Deanna began to struggle with her emotions and entered her teenage years in a more rebellious phase. She started associating with older peers whose influence was questionable, leading her down a path of risky decisions. Seeking a fresh start, Deanna later moved to Seattle to live with her father, where she managed to regain some stability and improve her behavior. Yet by the age of 15, the patterns of rebellion resurfaced. Feeling the pull of her familiar surroundings and perhaps longing for the care of her mother, she eventually returned to Spokane by bus, moving back in with her mother. This period of her life reflected the turbulence and search for guidance that many teenagers face, compounded by family disruption and early loss. About 6 months before her tragic death, Deanna Criswell ran away from her home in Spokane, leaving behind the security of her family. She spent her days living on the streets, navigating life independently while maintaining only occasional contact with her father over the phone. Her relationship with her mother remained distant, leaving her emotionally isolated and increasingly vulnerable. During this period, Deanna became involved with a man significantly older than herself, 36-year-old William Bill Ross Knight. Their relationship grew serious enough that when Knight moved to Tucson, Arizona, he sent Deanna a bus ticket in September 1987, inviting her to join him there. Upon arriving in Tucson, she did not reach out to her father, though she did manage to call her older sister Debbie, letting her know she had safely made it to the city. At first, Deanna's father did not immediately worry about her silence. He believed that, despite her young age, she was capable of looking after herself. However, as the weeks passed and Christmas came with no word from her, concern grew. He attempted to file a missing person report, but local authorities were hesitant to take action due to Deanna's previous history of running away. This left her father frustrated and the young teen increasingly unprotected during a critical and dangerous time in her life. On November 25, 1987, a grim discovery was made along Interstate 10 in Marana, Arizona. A homeless man walking near a culvert stumbled upon the body of Deanna Criswell. Recognizing the severity of what he had found, he immediately walked to the nearest police station to report the discovery. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they carefully examined the area. Investigators noted tire tracks nearby, a chilling clue that suggested Deanna had not been killed where her body was found. Instead, the evidence indicated she had been murdered elsewhere and later transported to the culvert, discarded out of sight. This detail hinted at the deliberate and calculated nature of the crime, setting the stage for a complex investigation into her final hours. After Deanna's body was recovered, her remains were transported to the Pima County Medical Examiner's office for a thorough autopsy. The examination aimed to establish the cause of death and create a detailed profile of the victim. Investigators determined that she had been deceased for approximately 2 weeks before being discovered. The autopsy also revealed that she had recently been sexually active, though there was no evidence indicating that she had been sexually assaulted. Based on physical examination, The victim was estimated to be between 17 and 21 years old. She stood around 5 feet, 3 inches tall, and weighed approximately 138 pounds. Her complexion suggested she was likely European American, though she could also have been of Hispanic or Native American descent with fair skin. Her brown hair was short and curly, but due to decomposition, her eye color could not be determined. The body showed no distinctive scars, tattoos, or birthmarks that could immediately aid identification. One notable feature was her unusually large upper front teeth, with a gap between the 2 center teeth. Dental records indicated that her teeth had been well maintained, reflecting proper dental care and attention. These details, while subtle, became key identifiers in the effort to learn her identity and piece together the circumstances surrounding her death. When Deanna's body was examined at the scene, investigators noted that she was wearing multiple layers of clothing. Her outfit included a denim jacket with rolled sleeves, a white jacket, a gray sweater, a multicolored flannel shirt, black jeans, white shoes, and purple underwear. The extensive layering suggested to police that she might have been a runaway or even a transient, possibly trying to adapt to life on the streets. A purple sweater had been deliberately placed over her face, a detail that law enforcement interpreted as a sign that the killer may have known her in life and experienced a sense of remorse, a pattern often seen in crimes of passion. The autopsy revealed the violent nature of her death. Deanna had been shot 5 times with a .22 caliber firearm, sustaining 4 wounds to the torso and 1 fatal shot to the neck at close range. The precision and placement of the shots indicated an intimate and personal attack rather than a random act of violence. Despite efforts by the Marana Police Department, Deanna could not be identified immediately. Authorities compared her to several reports of missing females, but many were excluded after analysis of her unique dental features. Fingerprints were also taken for comparison, yet no match was found. With the investigation at a standstill, the young woman, still unnamed, was laid to rest in 1989 at the Pima County Cemetery, leaving her story temporarily silent, but not forgotten. The initial investigation quickly cleared the homeless man who had discovered Deanna's body, ruling him out as a suspect. In 1988, attention briefly turned to another person of interest, Benjamin Batson, a convicted sex offender who had been seen with an unidentified teenage girl and was stopped by police for a traffic violation near the site where Deanna's body had been found. Officers searched his vehicle thoroughly, but no trace evidence linked him to the victim, and he was ultimately eliminated from the investigation. Years later, advances in forensic science brought new hope to the cold case. In 2009, investigators reopened the investigation, exhuming Deanna's remains to gather additional forensic evidence, including DNA. Despite these efforts, no immediate suspects were identified. In 2010, the FBI at their Quantico, Virginia laboratories completed a forensic facial reconstruction of the victim, creating a detailed image to help the public recognize her. Posters featuring the reconstruction were distributed throughout Arizona, and her DNA was processed to establish a formal genetic profile. By 2011, further technological progress allowed forensic teams to develop a partial DNA profile of a potential perpetrator from evidence collected at the crime scene. That profile ultimately matched William Bill Ross-Knight, a man who had become notorious in the 1980s for a series of spree robberies. Notably, Knight had used a .22 caliber pistol in one of his robberies that same year, the same caliber that had been used to kill Deanna. Knight had also been arrested roughly 9 days before Deanna's body was discovered, though at that time he was facing prosecution for robbery rather than homicide. This breakthrough finally provided investigators with a concrete lead in a case that had remained unsolved for more than 2 decades. By the time investigators linked William Bill Ross-Knight to Deanna Criswell's case, a significant obstacle had arisen. Knight had died in 2005 from liver complications while serving a prison sentence for robbery. Though forensic evidence suggested a connection, the .22 caliber gun used in the murder matched one of Knight's weapons. The DNA collected from Deanna's body did not match any profiles in the Cody's database. Law enforcement faced a frustrating dead end. They could neither question Knight to uncover potential leads nor prosecute him for the crime. As a result, Knight was never formally charged with Criswell's homicide, leaving the case unresolved for decades. The eventual breakthrough in Deanna's identification came through a modern, community-driven approach. Since the early 2000s, a number of websites and organizations have emerged to post information about missing and unidentified persons, leveraging crowdsourcing and the collective power of online networks to help solve cold cases. In 2014, after years of estrangement, Deanna's paternal aunt and uncle, Ellen and Donald Criswell, reconciled with her father. Upon learning that Deanna had not been heard from in decades and had never been officially reported missing, they began searching online databases, hoping to find any trace of her. This effort was particularly significant because, despite her father attempting to file a missing person report back in 1987, local authorities had refused to act at the time due to Deanna's history of running away from both parents. The family's persistence and use of modern tools ultimately became a critical factor in reconnecting Deanna's story to her identity, decades after her disappearance. For years, Deanna's family had assumed she would reach out when she wanted to. After arriving in Tucson, Deanna had contacted only her older sister, Debbie Wren, and had not reached out to either of her parents. When her aunt and uncle, Ellen and Donald Criswell, learned from her father that she had been in Tucson, they began searching online databases for unidentified persons connected to Arizona cases. Between 5 and 10 months before February 2015, the couple came across the case of the Pima County Jane Doe and studied the forensic facial reconstruction posted on the Doe Network. Armed with a photograph of Deanna as a teenager provided by her father, they noticed striking similarities between their niece and the reconstruction, particularly the distinctive gap between her two upper front teeth. Additional features, including her estimated height and weight, further reinforced their belief that the unidentified remains could be Deanna. Acting on this hunch, they contacted Pima County law enforcement, who arranged for DNA samples from her parents to be compared to the DNA profile obtained from the remains. On February 11, 2015, more than 27 years after her death, investigators officially confirmed the match. The Pima County Jane Doe was Deanna Lee Criswell. Her family chose to leave her buried at the Pima County Cemetery. In March 2015, Jerry Criswell, along with Donald and another brother, gathered at the cemetery to replace the Jane Doe 19 gravestone with one that proudly bore her name, Deanna Criswell, finally giving her the recognition and dignity that had been denied for decades. Case 2 Chandler came into the world in Cincinnati, Ohio, growing up as the fourth of 5 children in a strict and tightly knit family. His parents, Oba Chandler Sr. and Margaret Johnson, had high expectations, and within the household, he was simply known as Junior. His father, a man who took pride in his Native American heritage, reportedly descended from Cherokee and possibly Lakota roots. Discipline in the home was harsh. Obedience was demanded, and even minor missteps could bring severe consequences. Chandler's early life was shaped by this rigidity, and his childhood carried an undercurrent of fear and tension. Tragedy struck the family when Chandler was still a young boy. One fateful day, his father took his own life in the basement of their apartment. The loss sent shockwaves through the household, leaving a mark on Chandler that would linger for years. Some relatives recalled a disturbing moment at the funeral, claiming that Chandler, overwhelmed by grief, reacted in an unsettling way whenever dirt was shoveled onto the coffin. While these stories vary and some family members disputed them, the event marked a turning point in his early development. Following his father's death, Chandler's behavior began to change. He started skipping school and wandering the streets late into the night, seeking a sense of belonging and escape. He gravitated toward a local group of boys who were drawn to mischief. Together, they dabbled in petty crimes, stealing bicycles and targeting passing cars with BB guns, small rebellions that hinted at a deeper unrest within him. It was during these formative years that the first seeds of Chandler's troubling path began to emerge, a mix of loss, anger, and a search for control in a world that had suddenly felt chaotic and unforgiving. As Chandler entered his teenage years, stability in his life became increasingly scarce. His mother often entrusted him and his siblings to the care of other relatives, moving him from household to household. Eventually, he was sent to Tampa, Florida, to live with his older sister Helen and her husband. School, however, was never something Chandler embraced. He flatly refused to attend classes, much to Helen's frustration. Hoping to steer him toward responsibility, she tried to arrange a factory job for him through her husband. But Chandler's defiance surfaced again in a strikingly bold way. On the day of the planned job interview, he spent the bus fare on pinball instead. He returned just hours later, asking for more money. The confrontation that followed escalated when he punched a window in anger, leaving Helen exasperated and eventually turning him over to their eldest sister, Alma. With Alma and her husband, Robert Doctor, Chandler experienced only a brief period of stability in Pinellas Park. He attended Pinellas Park Middle School for a short time, but quickly abandoned his studies. The pattern of rebellion and lawlessness intensified as he returned to Cincinnati to live with other relatives. By the age of 14, Chandler had stolen a car simply for the thrill of joyriding. His encounters with the law multiplied rapidly. As a juvenile, he faced arrest nearly 20 times, mostly for property crimes and, on one occasion, for assault and battery. Each run-in with authority seemed to harden him further, shaping a trajectory that grew darker with each passing year. In 1963, Chandler returned to Florida, moving back to Pinellas Park with his mother and stepfather. He attempted to work with his brother-in-law at a lathing company in nearby Largo, but responsibility remained elusive. Between these years, he fathered 3 children with 2 different girlfriends, yet he refused to play any meaningful role in their upbringing. Even as the world around him demanded maturity, Chandler's choices reflected a pattern of avoidance, defiance, and detachment, threads that would continue to weave through his life story, foreshadowing the troubled adult he would become. In the summer of 1965, Chandler made a bold move, leaving home to join the United States Marine Corps. But the structure and discipline of military life did not suit him. Less than a year into his service, after an incident in which he reportedly cursed at an officer, Chandler deserted. This brief stint in the Marines marked yet another chapter of instability, setting the stage for a life on the move. Following his departure from the military, Chandler became a drifter across the Midwestern and Southeastern United States. He lived under a series of false identities, constantly reinventing himself to suit his schemes. During this period, he fathered 4 more children with 4 different women, continuing a pattern of responsibility avoidance that had begun in his teenage years. His life increasingly revolved around deception, manipulation, and self-interest, and he began dabbling in minor criminal activities to sustain his transient lifestyle. Between late 1968 and early 1973, Chandler faced the law on several occasions. He was arrested 6 times, mostly for nonviolent crimes like fraud and theft. Yet some incidents revealed a more disturbing side of his behavior. One arrest involved a peeping Tom offense, where it was alleged he had spied on a woman through her window, engaging in indecent acts. Another unusual case occurred on January 28, 1969, when Chandler broke into a Cincinnati beauty salon and stole more than 20 wigs, valued at over $1,000 at the time. This led to an indictment for receiving and concealing stolen property, a bold, almost theatrical crime that reflected both his recklessness and cunning. By 1975, Chandler resurfaced briefly in Cincinnati, obtaining a driver's license and leaving an official trace of his movements. Yet even this small act of normalcy did little to tether him to society. His adult life, marked by deception, short-lived stability, and repeated brushes with the law, painted the portrait of a man always one step away from chaos, constantly drifting toward the next scheme or escape. On a cold February day in 1976, Chandler, along with an accomplice, targeted a couple in Daytona Beach. The day before, they had spotted the couple on their boat, noticing a substantial amount of cash. That evening, they forced their way into the couple's home. While Chandler's partner restrained the husband with electrical cords, Chandler led the wife into a bedroom. There, he made her strip to her underwear, bound her tightly, and pressed the barrel of his revolver across her stomach. The two men stole money, a rifle, a shotgun, and even the couple's Doberman pinscher before fleeing into the night. Just 2 weeks later, Chandler was apprehended at his uncle's apartment, facing charges that included robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and drug possession, the latter due to marijuana found on him. During his trial in 1977, Chandler struck a plea deal, pleading guilty to a single count of armed robbery. He was sentenced to 10 years at Doctors Inlet Road Prison near Palatka. While incarcerated, officials noted his intelligence. Chandler had an IQ over 120, but his reading skills were poor. He expressed an interest in parole and claimed strong Christian beliefs, though his participation in chapel services was described as only mediocre. Despite this structured environment, Chandler's restless nature could not be contained. Just 5 months into his sentence, while assigned to a construction crew working on Interstate 95 in Duval County, he seized an opportunity and escaped. After his escape, Chandler remained in Florida, mostly around Orlando, blending in under a variety of false identities. He frequently called himself James Thomas Wright and presented himself with fabricated jobs, including X-ray technician, mechanical draftsman, apartment manager, and aluminum contractor. He also claimed to hail from different home states, creating an elaborate web of deception. Between April 1978 and July 1981, he was arrested 3 times, but these offenses were minor compared to his previous crimes. Twice he faced charges for loitering and prowling, including an incident in Altamonte Springs where a woman accused him of spying on her through her bedroom window. The third arrest involved a theft from a vending machine, a petty crime that reflected his willingness to skirt the law for personal gain. Throughout the early 1980s, Chandler's life became a careful balancing act between deception and the appearance of normalcy. Each time he was caught for minor crimes, he faced fines, yet he skillfully manipulated official systems. Police later reported that he provided false documents, identity cards, social security numbers, and even fingerprint samples that never linked back to his criminal record. Some family members were aware that Chandler was living as a fugitive under multiple identities, but they quietly sheltered him, allowing his charade to continue for years. By 1982, Chandler had firmly planted himself in Maitland, Florida, under the alias Jim Wright. He lived with a girlfriend and ran what seemed like a legitimate aluminum siding business from their home. Yet behind this facade, he was operating a counterfeit money scheme, printing fake $20 bills for personal profit. At the same time, he had also become a police informant for Orlando's Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation. Though the records were later destroyed, documents and letters from the period indicate that Chandler received payment in exchange for tips that led police to raid X-rated bookstores, adding an unusual layer of official cooperation to his criminal undertakings. In May of 1982, Chandler's activities began to catch up with him. 2 teenagers were arrested in Knoxville, Tennessee, after attempting to use fake $20 bills to purchase tickets to the World's Fair. During questioning, they revealed that a man named Jim had given them the money after picking them up while hitchhiking. This revelation triggered a 3-month investigation, eventually pinpointing Chandler's home address. On September 27, 1982, U.S. Secret Service agents arrested him as he was driving back home. Officers discovered over $8,000 in counterfeit bills hidden in the trunk of his car. Even in jail, Chandler attempted to obscure his identity, claiming to a magistrate that he was a Cypress clockmaker. But his true history quickly came to light, and he was ultimately convicted for possessing counterfeit currency. Chandler was sentenced to 7 years at a low-security federal prison in Bastrop, Texas, where he used the time to earn a GED and accumulate college credits. In 1984, he was transferred back to Florida to serve a portion of his previous robbery sentence consecutively. Demonstrating his typical blend of cunning and patience, he successfully petitioned to reduce his time, ultimately being released on December 12, 1986. The next chapter of Chandler's life was marked by careful reinvention. For about a year and a half after his release, little is recorded about his movements, except for a speeding ticket in Kentucky on the first day of 1988. By May of that year, he married Deborah Ann Whiteman. Later that year, the couple moved to Tampa Shores, purchasing a home with a mortgage paid by Whiteman. Later that year, the couple moved to Tampa Shores, purchasing a home with a mortgage paid by Whiteman. In February 1989, their daughter was born, and Chandler re-established his aluminum siding business in Hillsborough County. Alongside this outwardly respectable life, he resumed his work as a police informant, this time assisting the Tampa Police Department, maintaining his carefully crafted dual existence between crime and legitimacy. On a late May morning in 1989, Joan Jo Rogers, a 36-year-old mother, set out on a vacation with her two teenage daughters, Michelle, 17, and Christ, 14. The trio had left their quiet family dairy farm in Wilshire, Ohio, embarking on what was supposed to be an exciting first trip outside their home state. They traveled to Florida seeking a brief escape from their routines, unaware that their journey would take a horrifying turn. By June 1st, as they began the drive back to Ohio from Orlando, it's believed that Joan became disoriented along the route. Opting to take an extra day to explore Tampa, they checked into a hotel along Route 60, hoping to enjoy a few more hours of Florida sunshine. While searching for their accommodations, they encountered Chandler, a man who would appear helpful and friendly. He offered them directions and, in a gesture that seemed innocent, suggested meeting them later to take them on a sunset cruise across Tampa Bay, a plan that would ultimately trap them in his grasp. The family's arrival at the hotel followed a familiar afternoon routine. Leaving Orlando around mid-morning, they checked into the Days Inn on Route 60 by early afternoon. Evidence recovered later, including photographs from a camera left in their room, paints a haunting picture of their last hours. Michelle was captured sitting calmly on the floor in one image, while the final photograph, taken from the hotel balcony, shows the sun dipping toward the horizon over Tampa Bay. These photos confirm that all three were alive and still in their hotel room as daylight faded, unaware of the danger waiting for them outside. It is believed that by the evening, around 7:30 p.m., Joan and her daughters were seen dining at the hotel's restaurant for the last time. Shortly afterward, sometime between 8:30 and 9 p.m., they boarded Chandler's boat at the dock along the Courtney Campbell Causeway. By the early hours of the next morning, authorities would later conclude that all three had lost their lives. Investigators later noted Chandler's manipulative tactics. Having been born in Ohio himself, he may have leveraged a shared connection to gain their trust. He also recognized that the family were visitors, spotting the Ohio license plates on their car, which made them identifiable targets in a place far from home. The horror of that tragic evening became clear just a few days later. On June 4th, 1989, the waters of Tampa Bay revealed the fate of Joan Rogers and her two daughters. The first body was spotted by sailors passing beneath the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, an object floating silently amid the waves. Not long after, a second body was seen drifting near a pier in St. Petersburg, just a short distance north of the first. While Coast Guard personnel worked to recover the second victim, a third body was reported floating a little further east. All three were found face down in the water, bound with ropes around their necks, and partially unclothed from the waist down, a grim testament to the brutality they had endured. Autopsies confirmed the unthinkable. All three had water in their lungs, indicating they had been alive when thrown into the bay. In a haunting detail, Michelle, the second body recovered, had managed to free one of her hands from the restraints before drowning. The partially dressed state of the victims revealed the sexual nature of the crime, a disturbing layer that underscored the calculated cruelty behind the attack. Chandler's method was chillingly meticulous. Each victim had been tied with a rope connected to a concrete block, ensuring they would either suffocate or drown. The intention was clear. The bodies were meant to remain lost, hidden beneath the dark waters. Yet, the very nature of decomposition caused the bodies to bloat, eventually rising to the surface and exposing the crime to the world. What was meant to be an invisible act of violence became a grim public discovery, igniting shock, grief, and outrage across the community. The tropical heat of early June sped up the natural decomposition of the Rogers family's bodies, leaving authorities unable to immediately identify them. For nearly a week, the three women remained nameless, drifting in the bay as investigators pieced together the tragedy. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, Joan's husband, Hal Rogers, had filed a missing persons report, unaware of the horrific fate that had befallen his wife and daughters. On June 8th, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A housekeeper at the Days Inn where the family had stayed reported that their hotel room appeared untouched. The beds were unslept in, and personal items remained undisturbed. Alerted by this observation, the hotel manager contacted the police, setting off a chain of investigation that would finally give names to the floating bodies. Fingerprints recovered from a room were matched to the victims, and dental records provided the final confirmation, linking the tragedy back to the Rogers family. Marine researchers at the University of South Florida contributed crucial insight into how the crime had unfolded. By analyzing currents and patterns in Tampa Bay, they estimated that the victims had been thrown from a boat, not from a bridge or from the shore, between 2 and 5 days before their bodies were recovered. Supporting this conclusion, the family's car, a 1984 Oldsmobile Calais with Ohio license plates, was found abandoned at the boat dock along the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Every detail pointed to a premeditated and chillingly calculated crime, revealing just how carefully the perpetrator had orchestrated the attack. By November 1989, law enforcement had begun connecting the dots. St. Petersburg police linked the Rogers family murders to a violent sexual assault involving a Canadian tourist in the same area. The similarities between the crimes were striking, and investigators quickly realized they were dealing with a dangerous and calculating predator. A police sketch was released to the public, putting pressure on the perpetrator to stay on the move. Chandler, sensing the walls closing in, left Florida and traveled to Cincinnati to see his estranged daughter, Crystal Mays. During their visit, he made a chilling confession, telling her that he could not return to Florida because police were looking for him for killing some women. Even in this moment with family, his presence carried a threatening edge, a reminder of the violent life he had been leading. Less than a year later, in October 1990, Chandler again visited Crystal under a darker pretense. He orchestrated a drug deal, bringing along Crystal's husband, Rick Mays. During the exchange, Chandler betrayed Mays, seizing money from the dealers and leaving him behind at gunpoint. He coldly told his son-in-law, "Family don't mean shit to me." Mays narrowly escaped a brutal beating, and the couple's home was vandalized in the aftermath. The trauma left deep scars. Crystal dropped out of nursing school, and she urged her husband to press charges against her own father, finally taking a stand against his dangerous and violent behavior. At the same time, Chandler's personal life was unraveling financially. His troubles began with the IRS, which pursued him over unpaid back taxes from 1988. Not long after, a lien was placed on him for failing to pay utility bills. Despite these setbacks, Chandler continued to maintain the appearance of a functioning business. In April 1990, he secured a state permit for his aluminum siding company, projecting an image of stability. However, his financial mismanagement quickly spiraled. By July of that year, Chandler and his wife had stopped making payments on their Tampa Shores home. The couple moved out the following month without informing the bank, leaving neighbors puzzled. Chandler even misled them, claiming he was relocating to a new $340,000 home in Indian Rocks Beach. By December 1990, the bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings, and when the property was eventually resold in 1992, it was discovered that the house had been stripped of furniture and the pool left full and neglected, a clear sign of the chaotic life he led behind closed doors. After a brief period in Sunrise, Florida, the couple rented a modest apartment in Port Orange in 1991, where Chandler began using his birth name again. He portrayed himself as an unemployed hobby fisherman, yet he continued to dabble in small-scale business ventures. He claimed to own a pool screen enclosure company and was often hired by neighbors to install aluminum siding. He also engaged in buying and reselling boats and cars, creating a pattern of opportunistic and short-term financial dealings. Even in the midst of his mounting legal and personal troubles, Chandler managed to maintain an image of normalcy, a carefully constructed facade that concealed the darker realities of his life. Between May and September of 1991, Chandler operated in a strange duality. While the Rogers family murders were still unsolved, he was acting as an informant for the U.S. Customs Bureau's Tampa office. At the same time, he manipulated family connections for his own gain. Chandler convinced his nephew-in-law, John Martin, to smuggle marijuana grown at Chandler's home. When Martin attempted to sell some of the drugs to his employer, Steve Segura, Chandler arranged a meeting that turned out to be a police sting. Both men were arrested, with Martin receiving probation and community service, and Segura facing a longer probation and hefty community duties. This episode showed Chandler's ability to stay one step ahead while drawing others into his schemes. Chandler's recklessness eventually drew attention from those around him. In the spring of 1992, a former neighbor, Joe, and Steffi, recognized his handwriting on a work contract. Police had widely circulated the handwriting from a brochure found in the Rogers car, but initial tips had gone largely ignored. Steffi took matters into her own hands, calling the St. Petersburg police on May 14th and later sending a copy of the contract via fax. A follow-up in July finally prompted detectives to interview her, providing a crucial lead that would bring Chandler into the spotlight. The danger posed by Chandler escalated further that September. On the 11th, he robbed two jewelry manufacturers at gunpoint in their motel room in Pinellas Park. Traveling with his wife, who remained in the room with their daughter, Chandler stole merchandise, company vehicles, and valuables, later taking 3 cases of jewelry home. The crime was audacious, with the stolen items later melted down into pure gold. Although the full extent of his wife's awareness remains unclear, she admitted to finding the circumstances suspicious. The total value of the heist was staggering, initially estimated at $140,000, but later believed to be closer to $750,000. Chandler's luck ran out shortly thereafter. By September 24, 1992, he was arrested and charged with murder, rape, armed robbery, and felony firearm possession. Investigators relied heavily on a brochure found in the Rogers car, which contained handwritten directions and a description of Chandler's boat, linking him directly to the crime. Police took the unusual step of posting his handwriting on billboards across the Tampa Bay area, a tactic that finally produced a critical tip from a former neighbor who provided a copy of Chandler's work order. Forensic analysis confirmed the match. Chandler's handwriting on the brochure and the neighbor's work order were identical, and a palm print on the brochure further sealed the case. By the time the tip came in, Chandler had sold his boat and moved his family from Tampa to Port Orange near Daytona Beach, attempting to vanish once again. In the investigation's early stages, authorities briefly considered the possibility of a second suspect. Television reenactments and speculation suggested Chandler might have had an accomplice, but no evidence ever substantiated this claim. Even rumors involving Hal Rogers' brother, John, were thoroughly investigated and dismissed once police confirmed he was in prison at the time of the murders and could not have orchestrated or known the timing of the trip. Hal himself was also scrutinized due to his posting bail for John, but his movements and finances were fully accounted for, proving he was not involved. These dead ends ultimately reinforced Chandler as the sole perpetrator, a man capable of preying on strangers while hiding in plain sight. During his trial in Clearwater, Florida, Chandler presented a carefully rehearsed version of events. He admitted meeting Joan, Michelle, and Chris Rogers and giving them directions, but claimed he never saw them again, except in newspaper stories and on billboards. Chandler acknowledged that he had been in Tampa Bay the night of the murders, but insisted he was fishing alone. He said his boat engine had failed due to a gas line leak, forcing him to return home late, and claimed he had contacted both the Coast Guard and Florida Marine Patrol for help. According to Chandler, he even flagged down a passing patrol boat, only to be turned away. He said he had patched the gas line with duct tape and made it safely to shore. However, Investigators found numerous holes in Chandler's story. No distress calls were ever recorded that night, and no Coast Guard boats had been on the bay that morning. A boat mechanic testified that Chandler's explanation of fixing a fuel leak was impossible. The lines on his 1976 Bayliner ran upward, meaning any leak would spray gasoline into the air, dissolving the duct tape he claimed to have used. Under intense questioning from prosecutor Douglas Crowe, Chandler ultimately claimed he could not remember, an evasive tactic that did little to convince the jury. Chandler's pattern of predatory behavior extended beyond a Rogers family. Just 2 weeks prior to their murders, he raped a Canadian tourist named Judy Blair aboard his boat. Blair had met Chandler at a Tampa convenience store, where he introduced himself under the alias Dave Posner. He convinced Blair and her friend Barbara Mottram to take a boat tour, though Mottram declined on short notice. During the outing, Chandler sailed them to the Gulf of Mexico and assaulted Blair before returning her to shore. Blair later reported the crime to police and, during the 1992 trial, positively identified Chandler for photographs and a lineup, although he was never charged with this assault. First, because his identity was unknown, and later to spare Blair from reliving the trauma. Her testimony helped link him to other criminal activity. Testimony also revealed Chandler's deceptive lifestyle. Blair and Mottram recall that he claimed to run an aluminum siding business, a detail that eventually inspired the FBI's Operation Tin Man. A former employee testified that Chandler bragged about dating 3 women on the bay the night of the Rogers murders, and that he returned to deliver materials the next morning before leaving again. Investigators also obtained records of multiple ship-to-shore phone calls from his boat to his home between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., possibly attempts to explain his absence to his wife and construct an alibi. Family members further exposed Chandler's criminal nature. His daughter, Crystal Sue Mays, testified that her father had admitted the police were after him because he killed some women. Her husband, Rick, recalled that Chandler had confessed to raping women in the Madeira Beach area and admitted that one had got away. Another daughter, Valerie Troxell, testified that he had admitted to a sexual assault just 2 weeks before the Rogers murders. Even hotel staff contributed to the timeline. A maid at the Days recalled seeing Chandler pass the Rogers room on June 1st, though she did not recognize its significance until his 1992 arrest. His cellmate, William Katzer, testified that Chandler had remarked after seeing a news report about the Rogers murders, "If the bitch hadn't resisted, I wouldn't be here." In addition, both Michelle Rogers' boyfriend and Hal Rogers provided testimony during the trial, helping to establish the timeline and confirm Chandler's guilt. On June 13th, 1989, Joe and Michelle and Chris Rogers were laid to rest in their hometown of Wilshire, Ohio. Around 300 family members and friends attended the funeral, mourning the tragic loss of a mother and her 2 daughters. Police officers were stationed outside the church to keep reporters and television crews at bay, allowing the grieving family a measure of privacy amid the intense media attention. After a lengthy trial, Chandler was found guilty of the murders and sentenced to death on November 4th, 1994. Throughout the proceedings, he continued to proclaim his innocence, filing multiple appeals while awaiting execution on Florida's death row. Chandler admitted to the Madeira Beach assault, but claimed it had been consensual, insisting that the victim had changed her mind mid-act. Prosecutors chose not to pursue additional charges for that rape, both because Chandler had already received a death sentence and to spare the victim the trauma of a second trial. Chandler served his sentence at the Union Correctional Institution. Following his conviction, his wife Deborah filed for divorce, and their marriage was formally dissolved a year later. He lost all contact with his daughter Whitney, who, by her mother's wishes, was shielded from her father and later photographs of her life. In July 2008, Chandler's name appeared on Florida's short list of executions, marking him as one of the state's most infamous inmates. Experts who studied Chandler suggested he may have had a violent past prior to the Rogers murders, noting that the calculated abduction and killing of 3 women at once required experience and boldness. He remained a suspect in other cold cases, including the 1982 death of a woman off Anna Maria Island. But in 2011, that case was resolved when the victim, Amy Hurst, was identified, and her husband was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Chandler was never charged with another murder, and all his appeals from a 1994 conviction were ultimately denied, the last in May 2007. In the years following his trial, Chandler became a notorious figure in Florida's criminal history. Media coverage highlighted the chilling nature of his crimes, and his demeanor in court, staring at jurors with a cold grin, left a lasting impression. One juror recalled, "He scared some of the jurors. He would make your skin crawl." Judge Susan F. Schaefer, who presided over his trial, described him in a 2011 interview as a man with no soul, adding, "It's the worst case factually and in terms of a defendant without saving grace that I ever handled. And I represented plenty of people who were not necessarily good people." Chandler reportedly told officials that his last words before execution would be, "Kiss my rosy red ass," reflecting the same brazen arrogance that had marked his life. On October 10th, 2011, Florida Governor Rick Scott signed Chandler's death warrant, scheduling his execution for November 15th at 4 p.m. Chandler's lawyer, Via Harrison, explained that his client had asked him not to file frivolous appeals just to delay the inevitable. Chandler reportedly wanted no drama, instructing his lawyer to pursue only reasonable legal avenues to challenge the execution. By this point, Chandler was struggling with several health issues, including high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, kidney problems, and arthritis. In the weeks leading up to his execution, Harrison filed motions challenging the constitutionality of Florida's death penalty system, in which judges, not juries, made the final sentencing decision. Chandler avoided court hearings, citing poor health and a dislike for traveling to Clearwater. All appeals were ultimately denied. On November 7th, 2011, the Florida Supreme Court rejected his final appeal, and the United States Supreme Court also refused to intervene. At 4:08 p.m. on November 15th, Chandler was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. He declined to speak, though he left a written statement claiming, "You are killing an innocent man today." Governor Scott, reflecting on the decision, said, "Chandler killed 3 women. There's never one thing. It was the right case." Reactions from Chandler's family were mixed. His daughter Valerie Troxel expressed her belief that her father may have been innocent, arguing that he could not have committed the murders alone and that the prosecution's case was weak. His son Jeff criticized the media's influence, stating that Chandler had been convicted in the court of public opinion before trial. Another daughter, Suzette, took a harsher stance, calling her father a monster who got what he deserved. During his years on death row, Chandler lived in isolation, earning the grim title of the loneliest man in the loneliest place on earth, never receiving visitors. Even after his execution, Chandler's criminal legacy continued to unfold. Investigators later confirmed he had been responsible for the 1990 rape and murder of 20-year-old Evilise Berrios-Begaris in Coral Springs, Florida. Berrios-Begaris, a newlywed, was last seen at her workplace at Sawgrass Mills Mall, and her body was discovered 3 hours later under a residential mailbox. Chandler had lived less than 2 miles from her workplace and moved from his apartment shortly after the murder, leaving a chilling pattern of predatory behavior. Chandler's crimes and the investigation into his life have been widely covered by the media. The Discovery Channel aired an episode of Scene of the crime titled The Tin Man. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Thomas French documented the case in a 1997 series called Angels and Demons for the St. Petersburg Times, exploring the murders, Chandler's capture, and the impact on the Rogers family. His story has been featured in Unsolved Mysteries, Cold Case Files, Crime Stories, Forensic Files, On the Case with Paul Azan, Murder in Paradise, and even podcasts such as Case File. Books like Mason Ramsey's Bodies in the Bay and Don Davis's Death Cruise have also chronicled his crimes, cementing Chandler as one of Florida's most notorious serial offenders. Case 3 Yehuda Kletsky, affectionately known as Libby, was the cherished only son among 6 siblings, growing up in a devoted Boyaner Hasidic family in Borough Park. His parents, Nachman and Esti Kletsky, had always been protective, making sure their children were safe within the close-knit community. Libby was described by family and friends as a bright, cheerful boy who brought light into the lives of everyone around him. One Monday afternoon, during the late hours of the day, Libby was reported missing. He had been walking home from a day camp held at his school, Yeshiva Boyan Teferez Mordecai Shlomo. It was a small victory for him. He had persuaded his parents to let him walk home instead of riding the school bus. It was the very first time they allowed him this independence, and they had carefully practiced the route together the day before to ensure he would find his way safely. His mother, Esti, had waited for him at a specific point a few blocks from the school, along 50th Street and 13th Avenue. But despite their careful planning, tragedy struck. Upon leaving the camp, Libby took a wrong turn, straying from the familiar path and heading in the wrong direction. What should have been a short, familiar walk home turned into the beginning of a nightmare that would grip the community and later the entire city. As evening fell, Libby's mother quickly realized something was terribly wrong. Around early evening, she called the Brooklyn South Shamram, a volunteer civilian patrol, to report her missing child. Shamram, a group accustomed to handling such emergencies and usually responding to multiple missing child calls every day, sprang into action immediately. Volunteers combed local candy stores, shops, and the homes of friends and relatives, hoping to find any sign of the boy. By late evening, when no trace of Libby was found, Shamram contacted the New York City Police Department. The city declared a Level 1 search, mobilizing canine units, mounted police, and helicopters to scour the neighborhood from above and below. The urgency of the situation spread quickly, and by the next morning, Shamram joined forces with other community organizations in Crown Heights, Flatbush, and Williamsburg to call for volunteers. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of Orthodox Jewish residents, some traveling from distant parts of the tri-state area, joined a block-by-block search for Libby. Even residents from neighboring communities, including local Bangladeshi families, lent their support in the desperate hunt. A reward was posted by a state assemblyman for any information that could lead to Libby's safe return, which soon grew to a life-changing sum, fueled by the community's hope and concern. Meanwhile, one devoted father, Yaakov German, a member of the Bobover Hasidic community and father of Libby's yeshiva teacher, took a more detailed approach. Alongside his son, he went door to door, reviewing surveillance camera footage from stores and offices along the boy's route. The videos revealed a chilling sequence. Shortly after leaving his school on 44th Street between 12th and 13th Avenues, Libby missed the planned turn and continued walking straight. Footage captured him passing a locksmith shop, then continuing down the street past 15th and 17th Avenues. On 18th Avenue, the boy was seen speaking to a man who then crossed the street and entered a nearby dentist's office. When the man emerged, Libby followed him and appeared to get into the man's car, a moment that would later become a critical clue in the investigation. As the investigation unfolded, the police traced the surveillance videos back to a dentist's office along the boy's route. The dentist quickly alerted his receptionist, who also happened to be the wife of local politician Simcha Eichenstein. She provided the authorities with the name and address of the man who had visited the office that day to pay a bill, giving police a crucial lead. By shortly after midnight, detectives were able to identify the vehicle captured on camera, a gold Honda Accord from the early 90s. Less than an hour later, volunteers from Flatbush, who had been assisting in the search in the Kensington area, spotted the car and sent the license plate information to authorities. It matched the suspect's details, narrowing the investigation to a single person. In the early hours of Wednesday morning, police arrived at the suspect's apartment in Kensington. The door was open when they entered, and upon questioning, the suspect allegedly gestured toward the kitchen. Their officers were met with a horrifying scene: blood-soaked carving knives and towels stuffed into bags. In the freezer, they discovered the boy's severed feet. The suspect then directed the police to the location of the remaining remains, which were in a red suitcase discarded in a nearby dumpster. By 2:40 a.m., the suspect was taken into custody, marking a grim and shocking conclusion to the search that had gripped the entire community. In a handwritten confession, spanning several hundred words, the suspect admitted to taking the boy's life. He claimed that Libby had approached him for directions and accepted a ride, mentioning he wanted to be dropped off at a bookstore. According to the confession, the suspect then suggested they drive together to a wedding in Muncie, New York. They returned later that night, and the suspect said he had initially intended to return the boy safely to his family the following day. But when he saw the missing child posters plastered across the city, he claimed that panic set in. In a moment of terrifying impulse, he returned to his apartment and smothered Libby with a towel. What followed was a horrifying attempt to conceal the crime. He dismembered the boy's body, placed the pieces into bags, and ultimately left the remains in a suitcase, discarded in a dumpster in another neighborhood. Security footage from the Ateras Charna wedding hall in Rockland County confirmed that the suspect had indeed attended the event, yet Libby was never seen on camera. Later that night, another color surveillance video at a gas station along the Palisades Interstate Parkway showed the suspect and Libby stepping out of the car and entering the restroom together. The timestamp indicated it was mid-evening, further confirming the chilling timeline. Authorities found no evidence that the boy had been sexually abused, and it was clear that the suspect had been a complete stranger to Libby before this tragic encounter. The senselessness of the crime, coupled with the sheer innocence of the child, left the community, and eventually the nation, grieving, stunned by the horrifying turn of events that had begun with a simple walk home from school. Libby's funeral became a heartbreaking gathering for the entire community. Held in the parking lot of a Borough Park synagogue, the service drew thousands of Orthodox Jews, many traveling from across the tri-state area to pay their respects. Volunteers and members of the Shamram Civilian Patrol estimated attendance at roughly 8,000, while other reports suggested the crowd may have numbered closer to 10,000. The sheer scale of the gathering reflected the deep grief and shock that had spread through the neighborhood and beyond. The man responsible for this unimaginable tragedy was Levi Aaron, a member of the Orthodox community who had grown up in Brooklyn. His father worked at the well-known Hasidic-owned B&H photo store, while his mother had passed away several years earlier. Aaron lived in the attic apartment of his parents' home in Kensington. His personal life had been complicated. He had married twice, first an Israeli woman in the mid-2000s and later to a divorced mother of two from Tennessee, whom he met online. Both marriages ended in divorce, leaving him isolated in the years that followed. Aaron's co-workers described him as quiet and socially awkward, a man who often kept to himself. Childhood injuries, including a head injury sustained in a bicycle accident at age 9, were believed to have affected his behavior, contributing to extreme shyness and social difficulties as he grew older. Despite these struggles, he had no serious criminal history, aside from minor citations such as a traffic violation and a summons for public urination. Years later, Aaron died in Windy Correctional Facility in Erie County, New York, at the age of 49. His death closed the final chapter on a case that had devastated a community, leaving lasting scars on everyone who had hoped to see justice for Levi Aaron made his first court appearance in Brooklyn Criminal Court on July 14, 2011, pleading not guilty to the charges against him. During the hearing, his lawyer told the court that Aaron suffers from hallucinations and hears voices, raising concerns about his mental state. The judge ordered that he be transferred to the prison ward at Bellevue Hospital Center for a thorough psychiatric evaluation. While hospitalized, Aaron's attorneys explained that he tried to quiet the voices in his head by listening to music and described his behavior as unusual, drawing attention to his ongoing struggles with mental health. Controversy erupted later that year when one of his lawyers, Howard Greenberg, made public remarks suggesting possible genetic defects in the Hasidic Jewish community, a statement that sparked outrage and condemnation from the community. Autopsy findings soon confirmed the horrifying nature of the crime. On July 20th, 2011, the New York City Medical Examiner's Office revealed that Libby Kletsky had ingested a lethal combination of medications, including a muscle relaxant, an antipsychotic, and 2 painkillers before being smothered. The case was officially ruled a homicide. Weeks later, additional tests detected a 5th drug used for anxiety and depression in his system, painting an even clearer picture of the circumstances leading to his death. Hours after the autopsy results were released, A Brooklyn grand jury indicted Aaron on multiple charges, including first and second-degree murder and first and second-degree kidnapping. The indictment carried the possibility of life in prison without parole. The severity of the charges shocked even Aaron's defense team. One of his lawyers resigned the following day, stating that the allegations were too horrific to continue representing him. New defense attorneys stepped in to take the case, while the prosecution was led by the experienced Assistant District Attorney Julie B. Rinnelman, known for successfully handling high-profile homicide cases, alongside Assistant District Attorney Linda Weinman. The legal battle was only beginning, but the city and the community braced for a long, emotional trial as justice for Libby remained the central focus. On August 4, 2011, Levi Aaron was declared competent to stand trial during an arraignment at the New York State Supreme Court in Brooklyn. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a complicated picture. Aaron was diagnosed with an adjustment disorder and described as confused and apathetic, with what experts called a practically blank personality. Psychologists noted that he appeared reserved, sad, cooperative, and emotionally detached, ultimately diagnosing him with a schizoid personality disorder. Further details emerged that he had a younger sister who had tragically died while institutionalized for schizophrenia, highlighting a troubled family history. During his time in custody at Rikers Island, Aaron was placed under round-the-clock suicide watch. On August 12, 2011, he gave his first media interview to the New York Post. In it, he avoided using the boy's name, referring to the crime simply as the incident. When asked why he had taken the boy, he cryptically replied, "He looked familiar. I thought I knew him," offering little insight into his motives. The case itself soon drew scrutiny not only for the crime, but also for the handling of the defense. On August 23, 2011, Justice Neil Feiertag, overseeing the case, criticized Aaron's lawyers for discussing the case on social media and for allegedly leaking court-ordered psychological reports to the press. The judge questioned whether the defense team had sufficient experience to manage such a complex trial. In response, veteran criminal defense lawyer Howard Greenberg joined the team pro bono to strengthen their position. Pre-trial proceedings continued cautiously. On October 24, 2011, Aaron appeared via video conferencing for a brief hearing. His lawyers claimed that the suspect had been coerced into writing his confession, arguing that he was not mentally capable of fully understanding his actions, and indicated they were planning an insanity defense. In November 2011, attempts by the defense to move the trial out of Brooklyn, citing intense media attention, were denied. Despite reports that Aaron continued to hear voices, the courts repeatedly affirmed that he was fit to stand trial. Over the following months, Aaron appeared multiple times via video conferencing while attorneys coordinated trial schedules, each appearance reinforcing the anticipation and tension surrounding one of Brooklyn's most notorious cases. In August of 2012, the case reached a resolution that brought some closure to the Kletzky family. Prosecutors struck a deal with the defense. Levi Aaron would plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of at least 40 years to life in prison. The family supported this decision, hoping to spare themselves the trauma of reliving the horrific crime at trial. On August 9th, Aaron formally changed his plea at Brooklyn Supreme Court, admitting to one charge of second-degree murder and one charge of second-degree kidnapping. During the hearing, he answered the judge's questions and acknowledged his role in taking Libby's life. Later that month, Judge Neil Feiertag sentenced Aaron to 25 years to life for the murder and 15 years to life for the kidnapping, with parole eligibility set for the year 2049. Even as criminal justice ran its course, the Kletzky family pursued civil action. In August 2011, Nachman Kletzky filed a $100 million lawsuit against Aaron, seeking damages for the abduction, torture, murder, and dismemberment of his son. He also filed a separate suit against Aaron's father, citing neglect and a failure to supervise his son. These lawsuits highlighted the family's desire for accountability beyond the criminal conviction. Libby's tragedy also sparked legislative action. State lawmakers proposed Libby's initiative, offering tax incentives to property owners who install surveillance cameras. New York City Councilman David Greenfield suggested Libby's Law, a program designating businesses as safe havens for lost or endangered children. By August 2011, a similar program called Safe Stop was launched with dozens of stores displaying green stickers to mark them as safe places for children. In September 2013, the Libby Kletsky Security Initiative brought 100 security cameras to public lampposts in Midwood and Borough Park, funded by a state grant and monitored exclusively by the police, ensuring greater safety for the community's children. Libby's legacy lives on through memorial efforts as well. Relatives launched the Libby Kletsky Memorial Fund to support children and families in crisis, raising tens of thousands of dollars in its first day. Hasidic singer Lipa Schmelzer paid tribute through a ballad and music video titled Libby Forever, blending home videos of the boy with a somber reflection on the crime that shook the community. Tragically, the story would later take another dark turn. In June 2017, Levi Aaron's brother, Tzvi, was found dead in the same Kensington house where Libby had been taken. His body was discovered bound and wrapped in a blanket in the basement apartment. Though the circumstances were mysterious, the autopsy could not conclusively determine the cause of death, leaving another layer of tragedy and unanswered questions in the neighborhood, still haunted by the events years earlier. Case 4 Gabriel Daniel Fernandez entered the world on a cold February morning in the year 2005. Born to Arnold Contreras and Pearl Fernandez, his early life was anything but simple. Almost immediately after his birth, Gabriel was placed in the care of his great-uncle, Michael Lemos Carranza, and Michael's partner, David Martinez. For a child so young, his earliest years were already shaped by the adults around him, and the stability he needed was often missing. By the time Gabriel reached 4 years of age, his life shifted once again. Concerned about him being raised by a same-sex couple, his grandfather stepped in, deciding that Gabriel would live with his grandparents. In their home, Gabriel found a new environment, one that promised more traditional guidance. He stayed with them for several years, a period that was meant to give him consistency and care during his formative years. However, in September of 2012, another dramatic change occurred. Gabriel's mother, Pearl, along with her boyfriend, Isoro Aguirre, reclaimed custody of him. This move sparked alarm among other family members, who worried deeply about the choice. Pearl's history with her other children had raised red flags, and many feared that Gabriel might not receive the nurturing and protection he desperately needed. During the 8 months that Gabriel lived under the care of his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend, Isoro Aguirre, his life took a terrifying turn. What should have been a home filled with love and safety became a place of unimaginable cruelty. Gabriel endured relentless physical abuse. He was beaten repeatedly, burned with cigarettes and hot objects, and even shot with a BB gun. The horrors didn't stop there. He was forced to consume cat litter, cat feces, spoiled food, and even his own vomit. Each day brought new suffering, and the walls of the home bore silent witness to his torment. The abuse went far beyond physical pain. Gabriel's psychological world was shattered by constant humiliation and control. He was bound and gagged, forced to sleep in a cramped cabinet, and made to wear girls' clothing in an effort to demean and manipulate him. Every act seemed calculated to strip him of dignity and hope. Those around him, his siblings, later revealed that Pearl and Isoro often laughed as they inflicted the pain, treating the suffering of a child as a twisted source of amusement. Prosecutors later revealed a chilling detail about the motivation behind some of the abuse. Isoro Aguirre, in particular, held a disturbing belief that Gabriel was gay. This perception, rooted in ignorance and prejudice, fueled even more vicious acts against him. Gabriel, a small boy seeking love and safety, became the target of both physical torment and psychological cruelty, trapped in a nightmare orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to protect him. Gabriel's suffering might have been prevented had it not been for the vigilance of one caring teacher. Jennifer Garcia, his first-grade teacher at Summerwind Elementary School, noticed that something was terribly wrong. Gabriel began asking questions that no child should have to ask. Questions about being whipped and punished in cruel ways. Alarmed, Garcia made the first report to the child welfare hotline, hoping that help would come for the boy. Despite a social worker being assigned to his case, Gabriel's injuries continued to escalate, and Jennifer could see the physical and emotional toll on him every day. She persisted, calling the hotline repeatedly, reporting each new sign of harm. Each time, she was told a social worker would investigate, yet the system failed him. No medical assessments were ever conducted, and when social workers did visit the home, they spoke only with Pearl Fernandez, never giving Gabriel the chance to tell his own story or explain the pain he endured. Tragically, the situation reached a horrifying climax in late May of 2013. Gabriel was found unresponsive after a brutal beating, reportedly triggered because he had not tidied up his toys. Pearl Fernandez made a frantic call to emergency services. Paramedics arrived to find Gabriel naked and covered in severe injuries. His skull was cracked, ribs broken, and BB pellets lodged in his tiny body, a haunting testament to months of unchecked abuse. Gabriel was rushed to Antelope Valley Hospital, where doctors worked frantically, but the damage was too severe. He was declared brain dead, and just 2 days later, he passed away at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. An autopsy revealed the grim truth. Gabriel's death was caused by blunt force trauma, worsened by neglect and malnutrition. A young life, full of potential and innocence, was cruelly cut short, leaving a trail of heartbreak and questions about how such suffering could go unseen for so long. Pearl Cynthia Fernandez was born in late August to the early 1980s to Robert and Sandra Fernandez. Her childhood, by her own account, was marked by instability and hardship. She grew up in a home where her father was frequently incarcerated, leaving long stretches of absence that shaped the emotional climate of her upbringing. Pearl later claimed that her mother was abusive and neglectful, creating an environment that lacked safety, consistency, and affection. By the time Pearl was still a child herself, her life had already taken a troubling path. She later stated that she began experimenting with methamphetamine and alcohol at an alarmingly young age. Before reaching her teenage years, she made the decision to run away from home, distancing herself from the chaos she said defined her early life. Her education suffered as a result, and she eventually dropped out of school during middle school, cutting short any chance at a traditional academic path. As a teenager, Pearl described experiencing further traumatic events. She alleged that she survived an attempted assault by a relative and later claimed she was held against her will and repeatedly assaulted by a group of men. According to her statements, these events left deep psychological scars and led her to struggle with thoughts of ending her own life. Whether fully verified or not, these claims painted a picture of someone who carried unresolved trauma into adulthood. In her early adult years, Pearl had 4 children with Arnold Contreras, including Gabriel. Shortly after Gabriel was born in February of 2005, Pearl left him at the hospital just days later. However, years later, in 2012, she regained custody of him, bringing him back into her care after he had been raised by other family members. Pearl has claimed that many of her romantic relationships were abusive, including her relationship with Isoro Aguirre. She portrayed herself as someone frequently victimized by controlling and violent partners. However, some family members, including her Aunt Elizabeth Carranza and Carranza's partner, disputed that version of events. They alleged that Pearl herself was often controlling, aggressive, and abusive within her relationships. At the time surrounding Gabriel's death, Pearl was also facing legal trouble for allegedly threatening Arnold Contreras with a knife. After Gabriel passed away, she admitted to struggling with opioid misuse, including drugs such as oxycodone and Norco. These revelations added yet another layer of complexity to an already devastating case, one that raised painful questions about generational trauma, accountability, and the tragic consequences when cycles of dysfunction go unbroken. As the investigation moved forward, more details emerged about Pearl Fernandez's mental state. Over the years, she had been diagnosed with multiple mental health conditions including a depressive disorder, developmental delays, possible personality disorder traits, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychological evaluations suggested that her cognitive functioning was significantly limited. In a formal assessment conducted several years before Gabriel's death, her verbal comprehension skills were described as being similar to that of a young elementary school child. During the trial, a clinical psychologist who testified for the defense explained that Pearl struggled deeply with impulse control and emotional regulation. According to the expert, she appeared almost incapable of using rational thought to guide her behavior during moments of emotional stress. The defense argued that her traumatic upbringing, substance abuse history, and limited cognitive abilities played a role in how events unfolded. However, prosecutors maintained that regardless of her background, the sustained cruelty inflicted on Gabriel showed clear intent and awareness. Following her conviction, Pearl Fernandez was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the summer of 2018, she was admitted to Central California Women's Facility, where she remains incarcerated. Several years later, she filed a petition requesting resentencing, hoping for a reduced punishment. But a Los Angeles Superior Court judge reviewed the case and ultimately denied the request, ruling that she was not eligible for any relief. Her life sentence stands. Isarotony Aguirre's background also became a major focus during the trial. Born in the early 1980s, Aguirre struggled academically from a young age. He repeated grades and eventually dropped out of school, suggesting possible learning difficulties. Despite this, he maintained steady employment for several years at a retirement facility, where he worked as both a caregiver and driver. The executive director of the home described him in court as gentle and attentive with elderly residents. Co-workers even gave him a friendly nickname and recalled how he routinely handled intimate caregiving tasks, such as changing diapers, without complaint. To those who knew him in that environment, he appeared patient and kind, a stark contrast to the image presented in court. Aguirre met Pearl roughly a year and a half before they regained custody of Gabriel. Not long after, he took a position as a security guard at a market in Palmdale, working for a private security company. On the surface, his life appeared stable. But behind closed doors, prosecutors argued a far darker reality was unfolding. He was ultimately charged with first-degree murder under special circumstances involving torture. Although Aguirre pleaded not guilty, the jury found him guilty after hearing extensive testimony detailing the prolonged abuse. The court sentenced him to death, a decision later affirmed by the presiding judge. In the summer of 2018, Aguirre was transferred to San Quentin State Prison to await execution. However, the story did not end there. Due to a statewide moratorium on capital punishment issued by California's governor, executions have been halted indefinitely. As a result, Aguirre remains on death row without a scheduled execution date. In a later administrative transfer, he was moved to another correctional facility in San Diego, where he continues to serve his sentence. In late May of 2013, the nightmare finally began to surface publicly. Just one day after Gabriel was rushed to the hospital, Pearl Fernandez and Isoro Aguirre were taken into custody. At first, the charges reflected the brutality of the moment: felony child endangerment for Pearl and attempted murder for Aguirre. But when Gabriel succumbed to his injuries shortly after, everything changed. Prosecutors upgraded the charges to first-degree murder with special circumstances involving torture. From that point forward, the case became one of the most disturbing child abuse trials in California's history. The death penalty was placed on the table. Years later, as the case moved closer to trial, Pearl Fernandez made a decision that would spare her from facing execution. In mid-February of 2018, she pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement. In exchange, she received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Standing in court, she addressed the judge and her surviving children. She said she was sorry for what had happened, that she wished Gabriel were still alive, and that every day she regretted the choices she had made. Whether those words brought comfort or not, only her children truly know. Isoro Aguirre, however, chose a different path. He pleaded not guilty and prepared to fight the charges in court. The prosecution team, led by Deputy District Attorneys Jonathan Hatami and Scott Young, approached the trial with a clear and forceful strategy to present the jury with the full reality of what Gabriel had endured. Jury selection began in early autumn of 2017. Potential jurors were warned that the case would involve graphic evidence and could last for several weeks. They were informed that the victim had suffered extensive internal and external injuries. Ultimately, a jury of 7 women and 5 men was selected, individuals who would soon hear details that many described as deeply disturbing and emotionally overwhelming. When the trial formally began, the courtroom fell silent as prosecutors laid out the months of abuse Gabriel had suffered. Photographs, medical reports, and testimony painted a devastating picture of prolonged cruelty. Prosecutor John Hatami did not mince words. He described Aguirre as pure evil, arguing that no punishment could truly equal the suffering inflicted on a defenseless child, but that the death penalty was the only just outcome under the law. The defense pushed back, presenting a very different image of Aguirre. His attorney argued that before meeting Pearl Fernandez, Aguirre had no criminal history. He was described as kind and compassionate during his time working at a retirement facility, caring for elderly residents. The defense suggested that his life had taken a dark turn only after becoming involved in this relationship. But the prosecution insisted that the evidence spoke for itself. By mid-November, jury deliberations began. After carefully reviewing the testimony and evidence, the jury returned the following afternoon with a verdict. Isoro Aguirre was found guilty of first-degree murder and guilty of the special circumstance of torture. The case then moved into the sentencing phase. Jurors once again deliberated, this time deciding whether Aguirre would spend his life behind bars or face execution. At first, they were unable to reach a unanimous decision. But after further deliberation, they returned with a final verdict: death. The judge formally accepted the decision in court, sealing Aguirre's fate under California law. The courtroom was heavy with emotion that day: grief, anger, and a haunting sense that justice, though delivered, could never restore what was lost. Gabriel's short life had become the center of a case that exposed deep failures within the system and sparked nationwide conversations about child protection. As the criminal trials concluded, attention shifted toward another painful question: how had the system failed so completely? Public outrage grew, not only toward Pearl Fernandez and Isoro Aguirre, but toward the agencies that were supposed to protect vulnerable children. 2 social workers assigned to Gabriel's case, Stephanie Rodriguez and Patricia Clement, along with their supervisors Kevin Bom and Gregory Merritt, faced serious accusations. They were alleged to have neglected clear warning signs and even falsified official records related to home visits. Reports have been made. Concerns have been documented. Injuries have been visible. According to legal experts reviewing the case, there appeared to be more than enough evidence suggesting ongoing abuse, raising the troubling question of why Gabriel was never removed from the home. However, in the early months of 2020, a major legal decision changed the course of accountability for those social workers. An appellate court ruled that, although their actions may have reflected poor judgment or negligence, failing to remove Gabriel from the home did not meet the legal threshold for criminal child abuse. As a result, the charges against them were dismissed. For many members of the public, this ruling was deeply frustrating. It felt as though the system itself had escaped meaningful consequences. Law enforcement agencies were also scrutinized. Several sheriff's deputies were internally disciplined after investigations revealed that earlier abuse allegations had not been properly pursued. Reports had been made, yet deeper follow-up actions were not taken. The case became a symbol of institutional breakdown, a devastating example of what can happen when warning signs are missed or minimized. Gabriel's story did not fade quietly from public memory. In 2020, a 6-part documentary series titled The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez was released on Netflix. Directed by Brian Knappenberger, the series explored not only the horrific abuse, but also the broader systemic failures, examining the roles of social services, law enforcement, the courts, and the media. The documentary brought renewed attention to the case, sparking emotional reactions from viewers around the world and reigniting conversations about child protection reform. The tragedy even extended into unexpected corners of media. A loosely inspired independent video game, created by a Vietnamese developer, drew thematic influence from the case, reflecting how deeply Gabriel's story had embedded itself into public consciousness. But beyond documentaries, court rulings, and headlines, the heart of this case remains a little boy who loved to play, who trusted adults to keep him safe, and who repeatedly asked for help. Gabriel's story continues to raise uncomfortable but necessary questions. How many warnings are enough? Who is truly responsible when systems fail? And how can we prevent something like this from ever happening again? Case 5 in the early 2000s, Chun Jin-fong and his wife, Li Hai-yin, left their hometown of Hoyu in China's Fujian province with a quiet dream shared by many immigrants, a safer, more stable future. Like countless families who journey to the United States in search of opportunity, they arrived carrying little more than hope and determination. Eventually, they settled in Guilderland, a peaceful suburb just outside Albany, New York. Life there seemed modest but steady. Close to their home was a small takeout restaurant owned by relatives, King's Walk, where Chun worked long hours to provide for his family. By 2004, their first son, Anthony, was born. 3 years later, in 2007, they welcomed their second son, Eddie. The boys grew up attending the local elementary school, speaking English more fluently than their parents, and blending naturally into American life. To neighbors, they appear to be an ordinary, hard-working family. One resident would later recall seeing the children laughing and playing in the backyard while he carefully tended to her garden, always keeping a protective eye on them. Chun, though quiet, would exchange polite greetings. His English wasn't perfect, but it was enough for small talk, enough to give the impression of a man trying his best to build a life far from home. For years, nothing about the family raised concern. Their home sat along Western Avenue, a busy 4-lane stretch of US Route 20, where traffic moved steadily day and night. It was the kind of area where life felt visible, public, not hidden, which is why what happened on October 8, 2014, felt so shocking. Around midday that Wednesday, October 8, 2014, something unusual occurred. Chun failed to show up for his shift at King's Walk. For a man known to be responsible and consistent, this was out of character. He hadn't called in sick. He hadn't sent a message. As the hours passed, concern quietly grew among his coworkers. Finally, one colleague decided to walk the short half-mile distance to the family's house to check on him. What he found inside would change everything. Overwhelmed and struggling with limited English, the coworker was unable to fully communicate what he had just discovered. In a state of panic, he rushed to find another employee, a relative of the Chens, and asked them to make the 911 call. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street that once echoed with children's laughter would become the center of a tragedy that stunned the Albany community. Behind the image of a normal immigrant family, something far darker had unfolded. And on that October afternoon in 2014, the truth began to surface in the most devastating way possible. Within minutes of the emergency call on October 8, 2014, officers from the Guilderland Police Department arrived at the Western Avenue home. Patrol cars lined the busy roadway as yellow tape was stretched across the yard, sealing off what had suddenly become one of the most shocking crime scenes in the region's history. By nightfall, investigators from the New York State Police joined local authorities, bringing additional detectives and forensic teams. The following morning, residents awoke to the sight of investigators carefully combing through the wooded area behind the house, searching for any detail that might explain what had happened inside that small suburban bungalow. News of the killings spread quickly. It was soon confirmed to be the first quadruple homicide ever recorded in the Capital District, the metropolitan area surrounding Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. The rarity and brutality of the crime drew intense media attention. Local television crews set up along the roadside, broadcasting live updates. At the same time, Chinese language outlets followed the case closely. Newspapers such as World Journal and Tsingtao, widely read among immigrant communities, dispatched reporters to cover the tragedy, recognizing that the victim's story resonated deeply within families who had made similar journeys to America. In the first few days, however, official information was limited. Police released very few details as forensic teams worked carefully inside the home. Much of what the public initially learned came not from authorities, but from grieving relatives who spoke to Chinese language media during a news conference held in New York City's Chinatown. Chen's brother described a heartbreaking scene. Chen's body had reportedly been found on the first floor of the house, while his wife and 2 young sons were discovered upstairs, covered with a blanket, a detail that suggested someone had attempted to conceal the aftermath. Early rumors circulated that the family had been shot, but those claims were quickly denied. As investigators continued their work, more disturbing facts began to surface. Authorities later revealed that the victims had suffered blunt force trauma from a hammer. Subsequent reports indicated they had also been stabbed. The level of violence shocked even seasoned investigators and left the community struggling to understand how such brutality could unfold inside what appeared to be a quiet, ordinary home. For residents of Guilderland, the crime shattered a long-held sense of safety. Police Chief Carol Lawler openly expressed how deeply the tragedy affected her. Having grown up not only in the town, but in the same neighborhood where the Chun family lived, she admitted she had never witnessed anything like it. The emotional weight was personal. This wasn't just another case. It had happened on familiar streets, among people who had become part of the town's daily life. As days passed, grief transformed into visible remembrance. Neighbors placed flowers, candles, and handwritten notes outside the house. At the boys' elementary school, classmates and parents created their own memorial, leaving small tokens and messages of love. The loss of 2 young children, only 10 and 7 years old at the time, struck especially hard. Nearly a month later, funeral services were held in Chinatown in New York City, allowing relatives traveling from Chinatown to secure visas and make the long journey to say goodbye. After the ceremony, the family was laid to rest together at All Faiths Cemetery, located in the borough of Queens. What had begun as a hopeful immigration story in the early 2000s ended in unimaginable loss on October 8, 2014, a date that would forever remain etched into the memory of Guilderland and the wider Capital District. In the days following October 8, 2014, investigators would later admit that the first 48 hours, often the most critical window in any homicide case, were painfully slow. According to David Soares, the district attorney of Albany County, detectives faced challenges that went far beyond the physical crime scene. When they attempted to speak with members of the local Chinese immigrant community, they encountered what he described as cultural impediments, language barriers, and an overwhelming sense of fear. Many residents were hesitant to speak openly with authorities. Some feared drawing attention to themselves. Others were simply distrustful of law enforcement or worried about possible immigration consequences. In an effort to encourage cooperation, the Chun family announced a $5,000 reward for information that could lead to an arrest. At the same time, Soares publicly assured the community that his office would not pursue deportation actions against anyone who came forward with helpful information, as far as it was within his authority to guarantee. It was a significant promise, meant to build trust during a time of anxiety. But despite these efforts, few people stepped forward with meaningful leads. Silence continued to hang over the investigation. Technology, or rather, the lack of it, also worked against detectives. In 2014, home security systems were not as widespread as they are today. Investigators discovered that none of the homes or nearby businesses along Western Avenue had surveillance cameras capable of capturing useful footage from the early morning hours when the murders occurred. There would be no grainy video of a suspicious car, no time-stamped image of someone approaching the house. That absence left a frustrating gap in the timeline. Another setback involved the victims' digital records. Authorities sought access to the family's iPhone data, hoping it might reveal recent communications or clues about potential threats. However, Apple Incorporated initially declined to release the requested records. By the time the company eventually complied, valuable time had passed. Sources later acknowledged that the delay significantly slowed the momentum of the case, describing the interaction as something that set us back considerably. Forensic analysis did provide some important, though limited, details. Autopsies determined that the victims had been killed sometime between approximately 3:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. on October 8, 2014, hours when most of Guilderland was still asleep. That narrow time frame suggested the crime had occurred under the cover of darkness, when traffic along U.S. Route 20 would have been lighter and witnesses unlikely. Investigators were also able to recover DNA evidence from the scene, genetic material believed to belong to someone outside the family. It was a promising development, the kind of scientific clue that can sometimes unlock an entire case. Yet without a match in existing databases, the DNA remained just that, a possibility without a name attached. As weeks turned into months, the investigation continued, but without a clear suspect. Without surveillance footage, and without strong community cooperation, the case that had once dominated headlines began to grow colder. The question lingered in Guilderland and beyond. Who had entered that home in the early hours of October 8, 2014, and why? From the earliest days of the investigation in October 2014, rumors began to circulate. Whispers that the murders might not have been random at all. Some speculated that the Chun family had been involved in activities beyond their small restaurant business. Allegations ranged from illegal gambling to money laundering, even human trafficking. None of these claims were proven at the time, but in tight-knit immigrant communities, speculation can travel faster than facts. At a press conference held in New York City's Chinatown shortly after the killings, Chin's brother pushed back against one of the most explosive early reports published by Sing Tao. That report suggested the murders were connected to a gambling gathering at the house, claiming someone may have returned after a late-night card game to steal a large amount of cash. The brother firmly denied that version of events. However, he did acknowledge that Chin occasionally hosted low-stakes card games with friends, something he portrayed as casual social gatherings rather than high-stakes operations. A reporter from World Journal, who attended the news conference, later told the Albany Times-Union that many journalists present believed the family might have known more than they were willing to reveal publicly. Whether that perception reflected reality or simply tension in the moment was unclear, but the suggestion added another layer of mystery to an already complicated case. About a month after the murders, Newsday reported that state police had begun distributing bilingual flyers throughout restaurants and grocery stores along East Broadway in Manhattan's Chinatown, particularly in the area increasingly known as Little Fuzhou due to its high concentration of immigrants from Fujian province. The outreach effort signaled that investigators believed answers might lie within that community. According to an unnamed source quoted in the report, Chen had reportedly shut down his restaurant 2 years prior to the killings, and there were claims that his wife may have been in the United States without legal immigration status. The source suggested that despite no obvious steady income, the family appeared to live comfortably, fueling speculation within Chinatown that Chen could have been earning money through unrecorded or illegal channels. Yet, Guilderland Police Chief Carol Lawler publicly stated that her department had found no direct evidence that illegal activities were occurring inside the Chen home or the neighboring property, which was also occupied by Chinese immigrants. At that stage, rumors remained just that, unproven theories in the absence of concrete proof. A week after the killings, the Times-Union reported that the New York City Police Department, NYPD, had begun assisting local authorities by investigating possible leads within New York City. Reports emerged alleging that Chun may have been involved in transporting undocumented workers from Chinatown to restaurants across New York State and even into the Capital District, moving large amounts of unrecorded cash to pay them. Around the same time, The New Yorker had published a lengthy feature detailing a broader underground labor network largely composed of Fujianese immigrants, individuals willing to endure long hours and low wages in American restaurants because opportunities back home were scarce. traveling by day bus from Chinatown to Albany for restaurant work, illustrating how interconnected the network allegedly was. Later reports added another troubling detail. Investigators discovered 18 mattresses laid out in the basement of the Chen home. To some, this finding appeared to support the theory that undocumented workers may have been housed there temporarily. Still, authorities stopped short of confirming any direct link between those allegations and the murders themselves. Investigators also explored whether the killings could be connected to other unsolved homicides involving Chinese immigrant families across the United States during the 2010s. One particularly haunting case occurred in 2011 in D'Iberville, Mississippi, where 3 members of a restaurant-owning family, a married couple and the wife's sister, were found stabbed to death inside their home. Authorities in that case theorized that professional killers from New York City may have been responsible. While similarities existed, no definitive connection to the Chen murders was ever publicly established. As time passed, progress remained slow. By October 2015, 1 year after the killings, Scott Coburn, head of the Criminal Investigations Bureau for the New York State Police, revealed that roughly 600 leads had been received. For a crime of such magnitude, he described that number as unusually low. Investigators had sought assistance not only from the NYPD and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, which provided interpreters, but also from police departments in cities with large Asian populations, including Chicago, Los Angeles, and even Montreal. Authorities had reached out internationally to law enforcement agencies in China as well. Despite the wide net cast across jurisdictions and borders, meaningful breakthroughs remained elusive. Around the anniversary of the murders, District Attorney David Soares acknowledged publicly that very little tangible progress had been made. In 2018, Robert Patnaud, commander of State Police Troop G, the division covering the Albany region, once again appealed to the public. He reminded reporters that sometimes the smallest, most seemingly insignificant piece of information can unravel an entire case. When asked whether organized crime might have played a role, he did not dismiss the idea. Instead, he admitted that while it remained unproven, it's certainly a theory. Years later, the questions still linger. Were the killings the result of personal betrayal, financial disputes, a larger criminal network, or something else entirely? For the quiet suburb of Guilderland, and for the immigrant community watching closely from both New York and Fujian, the tragedy of October 8, 2014, remains an open wound, waiting for answers. Case 6 Emma Jane Walker entered the world on March 20, 2000, in the city of Knoxville, Tennessee. Born to Jill, a devoted elementary school teacher, and her father, Mark, Emma grew up in a warm household with a younger brother by her side. From an early age, she showed a love for learning and a natural curiosity about the world. By the fall of 2014, Emma had started her freshman year at Central High School, a chapter in her life where she would become deeply involved in school activities. She eagerly joined the cheerleading squad, not just for the excitement of the sport, but for the joy of being part of a team. Emma was known among teachers and classmates as an honor student, and she balanced her academics with memberships in clubs like Health Occupation Students of America, the National Beta Club, and Young Life, highlighting her ambition and commitment to both her studies and her community. At just 16 years old, she was a vibrant junior with dreams that reached far beyond high school. Described by her mother as compassionate and kind, Emma had a wide circle of friends who admired her generosity and warmth. She had plans to pursue neonatal nursing in college, driven by a desire to care for others and make a difference in the lives of newborns. Her peers remembered her as someone who always had a smile and a listening ear, a young girl with a heart full of hope and determination. On the other side of this story was William Riley Gall, who preferred to be called by his middle name, Riley. Born in 1998, Riley grew up in a home surrounded by his mother and grandparents, and he attended the same Central High School as Emma. Known as a bright student, he also made his mark on the football field as a wide receiver. Friends would later describe him as a jokester with a playful side, someone who didn't quite fit the classic jock mold. After high school, Riley enrolled at Maryville College, where he continued playing football at the Division III level, blending his athletic talent with his academic pursuits. At the time of the events, he was an 18-year-old college freshman, stepping into adulthood with all the promise and uncertainties it brought. In the fall of 2014, 14-year-old Emma Walker crossed paths with Riley Gall, who was already a 16-year-old junior at Central High. At the time, Riley was dating someone else, but he told Emma that he was planning to break up with his girlfriend just to be with her. He even went as far as promising that he would take her to prom. Emma, trusting his words, believed in his intentions. Yet, when prom night came, Riley didn't keep his promise. He attended the dance with his then-girlfriend instead. Although Emma was hurt and disappointed, she chose to let it go, showing her forgiving nature. Not long after, the two eventually began dating, stepping into a new chapter of teenage romance filled with excitement and hope. At the start, those around Emma and Riley noticed a seemingly perfect relationship. Friends and family described Riley as attentive and caring, showering Emma with attention and making her feel cherished. For a while, Emma appeared genuinely happy, and the relationship seemed like a dream come true. But as time went on, the mask began to slip. People close to the couple began to notice signs of possessiveness and controlling behavior. Riley didn't like Emma spending time with anyone else, and he disapproved of activities she enjoyed that didn't involve him. Over the next 2 years, their relationship became a turbulent cycle of on and off dating. Emma's parents watched with growing concern as the relationship showed more toxicity than love. They saw how Riley's behavior affected their daughter and knew that the environment was unhealthy. By October 2016, their worries reached a breaking point. Emma's parents made the difficult decision to ground her and forbid her from contacting Riley any longer, hoping to protect her from a relationship that had shifted from affection to control. By November 2016, Emma Walker had reached a breaking point and tried to end her relationship with Riley Gall. But Riley refused to let go. His behavior had grown increasingly manipulative. He sometimes threatened that he would harm himself if Emma left him. The weight of his words put Emma in an impossible position, caught between fear for his safety and her own need to escape the toxic relationship. Eventually, they did officially part ways, but Riley's obsession didn't end there. Even after the breakup, Riley found ways to stay in Emma's life, often contacting her anonymously. His messages were carefully crafted to pull at her emotions, including lies that he had been kidnapped. His goal was clear. He wanted Emma to feel sorry for him, to soften her resolve, and to come back to him. On November 18, 2016, one of these messages instructed Emma to leave her home and find him unconscious somewhere on the street. Emma's friends later recalled how scared and furious she felt after realizing she had been deceived yet again. She did not believe his claims, but the stress of the situation weighed heavily on her. The tension escalated in the days that followed. 2 nights before the tragic incident, someone dressed entirely in black appeared near Emma, attempting to frighten her. The encounter left her shaken, adding an eerie sense of dread to the already tense atmosphere surrounding her life. Emma's world, once filled with laughter and school activities, had begun to shrink under the shadow of fear and manipulation, as the stakes of her relationship with Riley became terrifyingly real. On November 18, 2016, Riley Gall took a dark step that would set the stage for tragedy. He stole a 9mm Glock from under the seat of his grandfather's vehicle. The disappearance of the gun immediately raised alarm. His grandfather feared that Riley might be planning to take his own life, a chilling glimpse into the dangerous mindset that had been building over months. Just 3 days later, in the early hours of November 21st, 2016, Riley left his dorm at Maryville College around 12:30 a.m., making his way to Emma Walker's home in the quiet Sterkey Hills neighborhood. Before leaving, he reportedly called a friend, asking how to remove fingerprint from a gun, a detail that would later underscore the premeditation of his actions. Once outside Emma's house, Riley fired 2 shots from different positions, targeting the room where Emma slept. One of the bullets struck the side of her head, instantly ending her young life. Meanwhile, Riley's roommate would later recall that Riley had been gone all night, not returning until around 4:45 a.m., leaving a chilling silence in his wake. At approximately 6 a.m., Emma's mother went to wake her daughter, expecting the usual morning routine of school preparations and cheerful chatter. Instead, she found Emma unresponsive, not breathing, and immediately called 911. The house, once filled with the warmth and laughter of a typical teenage life, had become a scene of unimaginable loss. That morning, Emma Walker's life, full of potential, kindness, and dreams, was abruptly and violently taken, leaving a community and family in shock and mourning. That morning, after the 911 call, sheriff's deputies rushed to the Walker home, initially believing they might be responding to a possible suicide. But as the scene unfolded, it became clear that something far more sinister had occurred. The lead forensic technician from the Knox County Sheriff's Office noticed a bullet hole in Emma's bedroom wall, immediately raising suspicions that this was not a simple tragedy of self-harm. When lead detective Alamere arrived, his eyes were drawn to a second bullet hole, positioned roughly at shoulder height. Outside the home, 2 spent shell casings lay ominously on the ground. One bullet had struck Emma behind her left ear, while the other embedded itself in her pillow. Almost instantly, the house was declared a crime scene, and a chilling stillness settled over the neighborhood. Detective Merritt, along with the Major Crimes Division, began a meticulous investigation. They interviewed Emma's family and friends, piecing together the final hours of her life. Throughout these conversations, one name kept surfacing: Riley Gall. His relationship with Emma and the history of manipulation and threats had made him a person of interest early on. A key breakthrough came from Gall's close friend, Alex McCarty, who revealed to detectives that Riley had stolen a gun from his grandfather the very weekend Emma died. When confronted, Gall initially denied the claims, insisting he had never shown the firearm to his friend and that he did not have the gun in his possession. Yet, the evidence at the crime scene and witness accounts were beginning to paint a clear and damning picture of premeditation. Shortly after the investigation heated up, Riley Gall sent messages to his friends, warning them not to speak with the detectives. But the authorities had already made a crucial discovery. The bullets recovered from Emma's bedroom were fired from a 9mm Glock, the very same weapon that had gone missing from Gall's grandfather. It quickly became clear that the investigation was closing in. Realizing the truth, 2 of Gall's friends, Alex McCarty and Noah Walton, decided to cooperate with law enforcement, helping detectives recover the murder weapon and other critical evidence. That day, detectives carefully equipped McCarty and Walton with microphones, a transmitter, and a hidden video camera, turning the friends into a crucial part of the sting operation. Walton lured Gall to his house under the guise of playing video games, capturing every move on camera. During the visit, Gall denied any involvement in Emma's death, even attempting to manipulate his friends by suggesting they tell detectives they were drinking that night. As the meeting progressed, Gall led them to a wooded area called the Bluffs, near a river, while making stops along the way. At his stepfather's house, he had hidden the gun in the basement, along with gloves, black clothing, tennis shoes, trash bags, and black tape, all tucked together in one bag. Authorities later believed this black clothing matched what Gall had worn during the murder. He was attempting to destroy the evidence, planning to eliminate any link between himself and Emma's death. The tension peaked when McCarty finally saw the gun and exclaimed, "Oh my God, that is a real gun." Walton immediately notified detectives, and within minutes, law enforcement moved in. Riley Gall was arrested, ending the chilling night of lies and manipulations, and bringing the first step of justice for Emma Walker closer to reality. Riley Gall faced a mountain of charges in connection with the murder of Emma Walker. He was indicted on first-degree murder, felony murder, tampering with evidence, stalking, reckless endangerment, possessing a firearm during a dangerous felony, and theft of property valued between $500 and $1,000. The weight of the accusations reflected the calculated and devastating nature of his actions. Despite the gravity of the charges, Gall's family posted a $1 million bail, temporarily securing his release. During a hearing in October 2017, his defense attorney, Wesley Stone, requested additional time to prepare the case. Judge Bobby R. McGee granted the motion, postponing the trial until April 2018, giving the legal teams months to prepare for a high-profile courtroom battle. The trial officially began on April 30th, 2018, in the Knox County Criminal Court. The courtroom was tense, filled with family, friends, and members of the community who had followed Emma's story with horror and heartbreak. The following day, Emma's family took the stand, recounting the events of that fateful night and describing the profound loss they had suffered. Neighbors, the 911 operator who answered Jill Walker's call, and one of the lead investigators also testified, painting a detailed picture of the tragic morning. On May 2nd, 5 of Emma's friends testified about the incidents leading up to her death, including the day Riley had lied about being kidnapped. They revealed the texts Emma had sent them just before her murder, describing a man dressed entirely in black near her home. In her messages, she expressed fear, even writing that she felt as though she might die. Gall's grandfather and stepfather also took the stand. His grandfather confirmed ownership of a 9mm Glock, the very weapon used to kill Emma. During the trial, audio of Jill Walker's 911 call was played, along with videos recorded by Gall's friends during the sting operation. The defense attorney, Wesley Stone, did not deny that Riley fired the shots, but argued that he had been attempting to win Emma back, framing his actions as a series of twisted schemes, including faking his own kidnapping and positioning himself as a supposed rescuer. In contrast, prosecutors Kevin Allen and Molly Martin presented a starkly different story. Riley had planned Emma's murder in cold blood because she had ended their relationship. They emphasized that he knew exactly where to aim to ensure the bullets would strike Emma's head, highlighting the deliberate and chilling nature of his actions. On May 8th, 2018, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Riley Gall was found guilty on all major charges related to Emma Walker's death. Some of the counts were slightly adjusted. Stalking with bodily injury and a deadly weapon was reduced to simple stalking, and the charge for possessing a firearm during a dangerous felony was also slightly modified, but the gravity of his crimes remained undeniable. Immediately following the verdict, Judge Bobby R. McGee handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, totaling 51 years. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as justice was formally served, marking the end of a trial that had gripped the community with both horror and sorrow. Even after conviction, Gall attempted to challenge the outcome. In 2021, he requested a new trial, claiming there was insufficient evidence. His motion was denied, and he subsequently appealed to the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals. In February 2023, the appellate court upheld his murder conviction, while making minor adjustments to the felony theft charge, reaffirming the severity of his crimes and the court's stance on justice for Emma. Emma Walker's memory, however, would not be defined by tragedy alone. Her legacy continues to touch lives in meaningful ways. Central High School established the Emma Walker Memorial Scholarship through both the Health Occupation Students of America, HOSA, program and the cheerleading squad, honoring her dedication, kindness, and dreams of helping others. In Knox County, a dog park was named the Emma Jane Walker Memorial Dog Park, creating a space for joy and community in her honor. Even the East Tennessee Children's Hospital's neonatal intensive care unit dedicated a room to Emma, recognizing her passion for caring for newborns and her bright, compassionate spirit. Through these tributes, Emma's life and the dreams she held remain a guiding light, a reminder of the profound impact one young person can have on a community, even in the face of unimaginable loss. Case 6 Anthony Tote's childhood was marked by a traumatic event that would shadow him for years. His father, Robert Tote, was arrested decades ago for orchestrating an attack on his own wife. Robert had allegedly hired someone he once taught to carry out the attack, with strict orders to harm no one else. At the time, Anthony was just a young child, forced to witness the horrifying moment his mother was shot in the head. Miraculously, she survived and eventually rebuilt her life, finding love again in a second marriage. As Anthony grew older, he met Megan during their college years. She was a vibrant physical therapist and yoga instructor, and their connection quickly blossomed into love. The two married and built a life together, running a shared physical therapy clinic. Anthony took on the business responsibilities, while Megan cared for their children at home. They seemed like a picture-perfect family to their neighbors. Their children were encouraged to explore music and the arts, and Anthony even dedicated his time to coaching youth soccer and helping children with disabilities. Life took a difficult turn during a family vacation to a popular theme park. Megan suffered a tick bite that led to a serious illness, causing her health to decline gradually. The disease brought with it not only physical challenges, but also deep periods of depression. Over time, she became quieter, more withdrawn, and increasingly isolated, leaving Anthony to shoulder much of the family and clinic responsibilities. After spending several years in Connecticut, the Tote family relocated to Celebration, Florida, hoping for a new chapter in their lives. While the move promised a fresh start, Anthony continued his work at the Connecticut clinic, commuting back each week to manage the business. What had once been a socially active family in their Connecticut community now seemed almost invisible in their new neighborhood. The Totes kept to themselves, rarely interacting with neighbors or participating in local events, creating an air of quiet isolation around their home. By this time, Anthony's health had begun to decline. He had gained a noticeable amount of weight and had been diagnosed with diabetes, adding another layer of stress to his already complicated life. But behind closed doors, far more troubling issues were brewing. In the spring of that year, an investigation uncovered a shocking truth. Anthony had been billing patients for care they never actually received. Authorities began digging into his finances and soon discovered that he was funneling the extra money to cover the family's home in Celebration, as well as lavish trips to Disney World. On top of that, Anthony had borrowed significant sums from lenders in New York City and had defaulted on payments, leaving him deeply in debt. At first, Anthony denied any wrongdoing, insisting to investigators that he had done nothing illegal. But eventually, the mounting evidence forced him to admit to the fraud. Interestingly, authorities believe that Megan and their children were completely unaware of his actions. Megan had not been involved in the clinic's operations, and the children were entirely shielded from the financial deception, leaving the dark secret confined to Anthony alone. The motive behind Anthony Tote's actions remains a disturbing mystery. His own accounts shifted over time, offering conflicting explanations that only deepened the confusion. At one point, he claimed that Megan had attempted to take her own life after harming the children. In other statements, he said he was trying to save his family from an impending apocalypse, believing that by ending their lives, he could join them in the afterlife. In previous years, the Totes had a routine of returning to Connecticut during the winter months to enjoy the snow. But in the winter of that year, they stayed in their Florida home. Concerned friends and authorities tried to check on the family, and on a cold December day, police conducted a welfare check. When no one answered the door, they left without further action. However, by mid-January, alarming messages appeared on family members' cell phones, prompting investigators from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and Osceola County deputies to return. Despite their presence in the house, the family's home in Celebration had started showing signs of neglect. Mail piled up on the porch, and an eviction notice was left on the front door. With a warrant issued for Anthony's arrest, authorities approached the home. When he emerged, he moved erratically, shaking in a way that alarmed those watching. Using a key from a landlord, investigators entered the property and were immediately struck by a pungent, overpowering odor. Inside, the scene was horrifying. In the bedrooms, family members lay lifeless, their stomachs stabbed and crucifixes clutched tightly in their hands. The youngest child, Zoe, had decomposed to the point that she was not immediately noticed, only discovered beneath her mother's body during a careful examination. Even the family dog, Breezy, was found dead in her bed in the master bedroom, a silent witness to the tragedy. Anthony himself had ingested a large amount of Benadryl, claiming it was an attempt to end his own life. Investigators later discovered that the children had also been given the drug, leaving them sedated and defenseless. The scene was a grim portrait of a family destroyed from within, leaving investigators and the community stunned and searching for answers. In the aftermath, Anthony Tote's statements remained inconsistent. He claimed that he could not remember the murders and insisted that his initial confession had been made under intense pressure. Yet over time, he admitted to the killings, offering a bizarre story about returning to the family home in search of a missing silver Mickey Mouse necklace that had belonged to his youngest daughter, Zoe. Justice eventually caught up with Anthony. In a high-profile trial, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In an unprecedented decision, the judge added an additional year to his sentence for the cruelty he had inflicted on the family dog, holding him accountable even for the smallest members of the household. Today, Anthony Tote is serving his life sentence at the Santa Rosa Correctional Institution in Milton, Florida, leaving behind a legacy of tragedy that continues to haunt the community.